Hello and welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Ethan.
Ethan, okay, so I don't have an opening topic to talk about this week, so I think that we should get right into this episode because I don't know about you, but I love this episode so much. Definitely, like, one of my favorites of all time.
Oh, real of all time? That's
I think so.
That is high praise. I enjoyed this episode, but I was not, like, blown away by it. We'll get into it. I'm not saying this one's bad or anything, but I am excited to hear your explanation for why this is an all-timer for you.
It's a really, like, I don't know. I can't exactly explain it, but I mean, we'll get into it for sure.
Okay.
So in this episode, there's nothing like a nurse. When the nurses are evacuated from the 4077 after getting word of an impending air raid, the men find interesting ways to cope with being lonely. Okay, Ethan, so we know that I love this episode. What did you think about this episode?
I like this one. This one was, like, fun and kind of cute. It reminded me a lot of, I think it was the first season episode where, I forget the circumstance, but all the nurses kind of go on, like, a strike from the men.
Oh my god! That's so fun. Sorry, I just completely cut you off, but I actually was thinking that too. That was Edwina.
Okay. The MASH subreddit, I think, recently voted that as the worst episode of season 1, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're not alone in disliking that episode. But anyway, I like this one. It was like the good version of Edwina, I guess, where you get to see all the guys kind of flip out over not having the nurses around. And it was all like in good fun this time. It didn't feel reductive. I like how they all missed them. It was cute. And just everything about, like, the pacing wise, I liked the relationships that they had before they left, when they left, and then the actual air raid itself kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa! Which we'll get into, but I can see why you like this one so much, but please explain yourself why this is a high regard episode.
So, first of all, I definitely agree with you, too, that this felt very much like Edwina, this storyline, but it felt better because the nurses were also clearly, like, missing the guys, too, you know? It wasn't that weird, like you said, reductive kind of thing. So I thought that just, like, played a little bit better, and like you said, it was also an emotional thing, I felt, too, of just, like, yeah, we miss, like, you know, having sex with the nurses, but we also miss the nurses in general. I also like, this is later on in the episode, but there's just one OR scene without the nurses. And I always really like those scenes where the nurses, their presence is very missed. Like, their absence is very much felt, especially in the OR, because the doctors are just like, Radar and Father Mulcahy and Klinger can't be nurses. So, like, it's always very funny to see that and be like, wow, the nurses, you know, are necessary.
They matter a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So I always like that, like, little reminder. But also, I love this episode. Probably just like one of the final scenes in the episode where they watch Frank's wedding video. That is just,
oh yeah.
To me, that is like one of the greatest scenes of MASH to me. That I can't get any better. Like, the early seasons of MASH, just the best. Just absolutely amazing.
Okay. We'll get into all that. I have a whole thing I want to talk about with the Frank wedding video because I thought it was so interesting. But let's start out.
I just think about it, I start cracking up. It's just so funny. It's so funny.
Okay. Well, we'll get into it. I don't want to jump that far ahead. But let's start out by talking about how in the beginning, Margaret and this nurse kind of go like full head to head. And I really like that because we have not really seen that in the show up to this point. It was nice to see a nurse have this much kind of personality when in other episodes, it's Margaret being the head nurse and then all the other nurses, unless it's a spotlight episode for that specific nurse, are kind of nameless and personalityless. I like how this is just a nurse and it's not the point of the episode, and she kind of has a full-on fight with Margaret to the point where she goes to Henry and is like, I'm gonna go over your head to discipline this one nurse. I thought that was really interesting to see.
I also thought it was interesting. I kind of hated this though, because of course I did. Like I said, I think this kind of ties back to this aspect of the episode later on when the nurses get evacuated, that they are needed there. They are very much needed in the OR especially, but I hate when the doctors treat the nurses badly in the OR. Usually it's Frank, right? But you have seen it sometimes with like Hawkeye, Trapper, Henry just being like, hey, like hurry up, like get me this thing. It's just like, well, they're working, they're doing it. And I also really don't like when Margaret just like doesn't have their back. Like I get why she's like, hey, you need to like listen to the surgeon, you need to be on your shit, that kind of stuff, because the surgeons really are kind of the ones at the helm. They're running the whole thing. But I don't know. I don't like when Margaret is just like, yeah, my nurses, they're bad. They're terrible. I need to discipline them all the time. And it's just like, well, no, that's just, I don't know. That never sits right with me.
Yeah, I can see that. But I like the kind of realness of having this conflict, because let's just be real, working under Margaret probably is not an easy job.
Yeah,
so having there be some actual headbutting, I thought was interesting to see, although I do understand where you're coming from by Margaret just being kind of annoying about it and like, the general conflict not being something you want to see. But I like the dynamics of it, and I like how it kind of sets up the nurses as their own people for the remainder of the episode.
Yeah, I agree with you, though, about having this conflict. It was pretty interesting to see because, I think that this is almost like a little preview of where the nurses and Margaret's relationship with the nurses kind of go. We don't see it a lot throughout the series, but there are some episodes that kind of like spotlight that. And yeah, I think that it's of course, this is going to come later, like most things that I like about Margaret's character. But there's an episode later on that kind of like has this at the forefront of the episode. So I think you'll really enjoy that episode. But yeah, I did like that this nurse was like, hey, bitch, I'm trying my best here.
That's exactly what she said. That is word for word.
Word for word what she said. If I can just complain about one more thing, and then I promise I really like the rest of this episode.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. This scene with Margaret and Henry in Henry's tent. Like, Margaret was being unreasonable, like, no doubt about it. She was being very unreasonable. She wanted to literally put the nurse on, like, bed arrest for a month. And Henry was like, I'm not doing that. Like, get out of here. I'm not doing it. Completely fair, valid. But I hated the part of the scene where they close up on Margaret's mouth. Like, she's this, like, annoying nag. That has always bothered me for, like, many years because I'm like, really? No, she's, like, coming to the commanding officer as the head nurse, trying to talk to him about something. She's being unreasonable for sure, but, like, I don't know. I just don't, you know me. I just don't like the idea that women are just these, like, naggy bitches that it's just like, oh, this headache that I have to deal with. Literally.
I feel you. In very mild defense of Henry's reaction, I guess, he is very hungover. It's not really the nagging, it's more the speaking, which is kind of worse, actually, now that I say it out loud. But also, I really thought about... Thank you. Also, I really thought about during that mouth close-up, I was like, wow, that must have been hard to film. That was all I thought about, because I've made some short films in the past, and one time I had to do like a big mouth close-up like that, and it looked like garbage. So anytime I see that in anything and they do it well, I'm like, you've succeeded where I failed. Good job.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel you. Like, I understand. I also knew that was coming, and I was like, I hate this part. But Like I said, I promise I won't complain about anything else in the episode. Maybe. I don't know.
It was a weird stylistic choice. Like, that extreme close-up was kind of outside of the usual language of the show. And later on in the episode, there's like flashbacks. I was like, ooh, this is kind of experimental.
Yeah, and there's like split screen too. So I thought that they like took some risks with the shots in this episode too, which, you know, I can appreciate. Okay, fine. Like, I can appreciate the scene. So right after this exchange with Henry and Margaret, I know I said I wasn't going to complain again, but we do get Guitar Guy back. And we all know how I feel about Guitar Guy. But I liked this version of Guitar Guy a little bit better because Hawkeye and Trapper were singing along with him. So that was fun. And then we get, you know, the main plot of the episode of the nurses needing to be evacuated from this scene as well.
Yeah, I texted you in my astonishment that Guitar Guy was back, and I was surprised you liked Guitar Guy so much in this one. Or at least
I wouldn't say so much.
Him.
I would not say I liked him so much. I liked him a little bit better than last episode.
I liked Guitar Guy in his introduction episode. I liked his little song about sushis and sashimis. But this episode could not stand the second song he sings about missing the women. It was so that hippy-dippy 1960s trash that you were talking about last time. I was like, oh, I understand now. Because it also sounded like the singer was kind of doing his Bob Dylan impression. I'm like, don't do a Bob Dylan impression. Bob Dylan's famously not a good singer.
No shade to anyone who likes Bob Dylan and hippy-dippy music, but I just don't think Ethan and I are the target audience for that genre of music.
Perhaps.
But I like that he got some lines in this episode. I like that we built out his character a little bit more. I kind of wish that he was like more of a presence in the rest of the series after this, even though I famously kind of don't like his singing, but I don't know, it's fun. But to like get into the real reason that we're here today with the plot of this episode of just like they're evacuating the nurses because there's this supposed, I guess, like air raid. There's going to be like a paratrooper coming in potentially, and like, you know, from the enemy paratrooper. I don't exactly know what that was because Radar was talking about it very like quickly, and I can imagine that that was probably like, as few women as there were in the military back then, I can imagine that that was probably like the case sometimes on the MASH units where they had to like, hey, you know, the fighting's getting really close. We got to get these nurses out of here just in case anything happens to them.
Protect the women and children first. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So after this kind of gets rolling, we see several scenes where the doctors and nurses and everybody are like saying goodbye to each other. And I really liked all of these scenes. I thought they were like really funny, really cute, like, you know, all this kind of stuff. So what did you think about that?
I like this part a lot. This might be my favorite part of the episode. I like how they establish these relationships and briefly explore them, because I like the scene with Hawkeye and the nurse that he is making out with. I don't know if she has a name or if she's a pre-existing character, but their little banter that they had with about him being married and not being married, and the fact that she like bites his nose, I thought was really like funny and weird. And then actually I take it back. Maybe this isn't my favorite part of the episode, because everything with Frank and Margaret was insane. That was just an insane man who should never have a girlfriend.
Before we get to that though, I thought that it was really funny. I don't know if you noticed this or if this was like intentional with the writers at all, but I thought it was really funny how in that scene with Hawkeye and that one nurse who has a very like high-pitched, very adorable voice, she was saying how he was married. And Hawkeye was like, who gave you that idea? And she said, you did. And I thought it was really funny because I felt like this was kind of continuity from Ceasefire when Hawkeye was telling all the nurses that he was married so he didn't have to make plans with them after the war. I thought that that was very, very funny.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. And you might be right, because there's some continuity later in this episode.
Yeah.
So maybe it is the same nurse and she's just kind of cool with being the mistress in this relationship. relationship at the moment.
I'm just thinking, like, in terms of timeline for the show, too, that, like, I know that this happened in previous seasons, that, you know, exchange between Hawkeye and the nurses saying that he's married and stuff, but the idea that feels like for us that it happened so long ago, and that probably in like the timeline of the show did not happen that long ago, is always very interesting to me. Probably
only happened like a few weeks ago, because like, didn't the Korean War only last like 3 years?
Yes, exactly. And this was literally like, wasn't that the end of season 1?
Oh, I don't know. You're right. It might be end of season 1. I might be wrong. It might be season 2, but it definitely, I think, was earlier.
Right,
and,
right.
I keep saying this, but I am excited to see the timeline of the show stretch a little bit more, having to be like, everything's happened for 11 years, but it's only happened in a couple. Like, I know Alan Alda goes pretty darn gray within the next 3 years of his life, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always there's an episode later on too where they like are supposed to cycle through like an entire year. And I'm like, that doesn't fit with the timeline of this show at all.
That's fun. I love stuff like that. That is my favorite kind of thing, when everything's supposed to be very contained, but because of reality of how actors age in real life, you're like, that guy is like 10 years older than he was in the beginning of the show.
Yes, exactly. It's very funny. But to move on from that with Hawkeye and Trapper and the nurses, we should talk about this like weird thing with Frank and Margaret, where Frank gives Margaret 6 months worth of his like hair from haircuts. And it's so strange to me. It's so weird.
No, this was some serial killer stuff. Like, I hated this. This was disgusting. It made me, I mean, it was like a funny bit for Frank to have, but it like, in real life, if someone did this to you, run away immediately.
It was also so weird. It was so fucked up, dude. Okay, wait, I'm gonna compose myself on this one. But this is why I love this episode so much. Because it's like, it's so strange when you think about it. It's like, so weird. So Frank says, I usually send this to my mother. And you're like, wait a minute, what? And then he continues, and he says, she glues it into the shape of flowers and presses it under glass. What?
That is the most disturbing taxidermy of all time, and taxidermy is a sport where you stuff animals.
That's so weird. Why does your mom do that? And like, I'm sitting here like, keep me away from the Burns household. That's creepy.
And, like, last week, there was all these jokes about, like, Frank's receding hairline. And I'm like, I don't like thinking about Frank's hair. Not talking about Larry Linville's hair or appearance.
No, I don't
like
want to
thinking about Frank's hair.
I don't want to think about anyone's hair just clumped up in an envelope. That's weird. I don't like that.
And Margaret, like, was weirded out by it. But she wasn't as weirded out by it as you should be. She was like, I don't deserve you, Frank. Like, more or less, I think is something along the lines of that she said was, I don't deserve someone like you. And I'm like, you deserve someone much better than that. This is some Norman Bates psycho nonsense. I hated it.
It's so weird. Okay, I could go on. But I think that we should move on, because I don't want to take up the rest of our episode just talking about how truly coconuts that was. That was an insane scene. Okay, all right.
I'm just saying, the more we learn about Frank's mother, the more that I understand Frank being insane. Like,
right?
If she's 100% cool with Frank sending her his hair and then making it into flowers, Frank had a weird upbringing, and like, maybe we shouldn't rag on him so much.
Yeah, I need Fraser Crane to really get in there for me and tell me why Frank Burns is the way he is.
We need the ultimate sitcom crossover, Frasier and MASH,
Yes.
the big duo.
Okay. So to go from Frank and his mom and his hair, I did think it was really funny when they were sending the nurses off and they were saying goodbye. It was pretty sad to see them leave. And also it was hysterical when Klinger was trying to desert with the nurses.
Oh my god, I love this bit so much that he was just stowed away in like a bag that falls off the truck.
Yeah,
and Frank
literally
tries
a
to yell at
bag.
him for deserting. And he's like, no, honest, I just fell asleep there. Like, that is such like kid energy. Like, no, Mom, I definitely didn't do it. Believe me.
And he almost got away with it too when Radar was like, hey, wait. And then Klinger just pops out of the bag. That was very like a visual thing. Very, very funny.
Mm-hmm. And I love everything with Klinger from this point on, that all the soldiers and doctors, whatever, just are like, well, you're dressed like a woman, so we're gonna give you all our affection right now.
And Klinger was like, yeah, but as soon as the nurses come back around, you're gonna toss me aside. It was very funny. Klinger really like played into it. It was very cute.
It was adorable, I dare say.
But yeah, that brings us to our next point, that like after the nurses leave, the guys kind of just all have to cope with being pretty lonely. And I thought that was, this made me a little bit sad. Like I said, seeing the nurses leave, everybody seemed like pretty despondent about it too. They were like, oh man, like we don't want to go. And the guys were like, yeah, we don't want you to go. And it was cute. And they were all just like sitting around drinking heavily to kind of cope with the loss of the nurses. I thought it was very sweet.
Yes, that's a thing that I like above Edwina in comparison, that episode was entirely about like the sex of it and like the fact that they don't have the outlet anymore. But this, it is more like, I miss having just women around. Like, I like the presence of a woman, which is just a lot like sweeter and nicer. And obviously like sexuality is an aspect of that. But they're not saying like, you know, we need something to bang or whatever. They're just like, I miss having a woman near me, you know?
Yeah, they just like miss the companionship of the nurses, and like we keep saying, it was just like a just really sweet thing. And this is where we get Guitar Guy's little like song and this kind of weird montage of the nurses. Like I thought it was strange, but I also appreciated the like uniqueness of the scene. Like we don't see this a lot in MASH. In fact, like I can't remember a time when we see it again. So I don't know. Thought it was kind of cool.
I like this in concept, right? I like showing the nurses, and it does illustrate that everyone is missing them, and it like, because it's so unusual for this show to do, having like a song and a montage flashbacks, which included a clip from the intro, which was very took me out of it, honestly. Like seeing anything from a TV show's intro in the TV show, I'm like, that should not be possible. That is not canon. But I liked it because it was really different and illustrated the point that they are feeling like this desperation of like, oh, remember them? Here's our high school memory montage of all our adventures together. And it's literally just clips from earlier in the episode plus the intro.
Yeah, I'm like, you guys couldn't have figured out like a different clip to use, but okay, I guess.
And not to completely rag on Guitar Guy, but like, man, oh man, this song did nothing for me. I'm sorry to everybody who likes Bob Dylan and 60s music. Maybe once I get in my like 40s, I'll like appreciate it. I'll become like a dad or whatever. But right now I'm just like, nah, not for me, fam.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do agree, but it's okay. We can all like have our different tastes in music. It's fine. But going right from that scene to this one scene that, like I said, there was that quick OR scene where everybody was kind of like fumbling around without the nurses. And did you notice, speaking of Guitar Guy too, he was a surgeon. He was literally operating on somebody. And I was like, what? So he's what? He's just,
he does like more than just play guitar?
Yeah, I was like, oh, so he has like a true purpose at the camp right now. That's crazy to me. When I saw him operating on people, I was like, wait a minute.
It's almost like he exists on military base meant for doctors.
It's just so strange to me to like see, because if you think about, right, so this is kind of a tangent, I'm sorry, but if you think about it objectively, they need more than just like the 4 doctors that are there. So like there's definitely more than just like 4 doctors there. But it's so weird to like see, like when you see somebody who is an actual doctor operating on somebody and they're not the main cast, you're like, it triggers something in my brain at least where I'm just like, oh, right. Like these guys are not the only ones who are operating on people throughout this whole show.
That would have been a great episode, honestly. You mentioned a few weeks ago the episode of House where it focuses on Cuddy. It would have been great to see an episode of MASH where it focuses on all the ancillary doctors and nurses outside of our core troop of dudes and dudettes that we were following around.
Yeah, I agree. That would have been like a pretty cool episode. I think that we get some of like the guest stars and like, you know, the background characters a little bit more prominently in later seasons, but we don't really get like a true episode that's just like, hey, more doctors are here kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah, if you think about it, kind of weird.
We'll have to find that in, like, fan fiction, I suppose. That's their solution for such an old show.
If anyone knows one, point me to it.
Just real quick, I do want to mention that, and this is so minor, but with Radar working in the OR as a nurse, he doesn't have his glasses on and he's got a surgical mask on. Dude was basically unrecognizable for me until they called him Radar. I had no idea. He sounded a bit different too. You take the glasses off of a man and he has a completely different face.
It's true.
I say that as a person with glasses.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And I was also wondering myself, how is Radar working without his glasses? Like, I mean, I certainly can't see without my glasses. I certainly should not have my hands in an open body without my glasses on.
Maybe it was the adrenaline. Who knows?
Potentially. Who knows?
And last thing. But without any of the nurses, I was just really reminded of how dangerous that kind of is. Like, to completely ship off all the women. Of course, I understand it as like the women and children first kind of practice. But they were nurse-free. And yes, it's a camp of doctors and everybody's somewhat trained, but like Radar isn't. Radar's just like a kid. He's not gone to medical school. I feel like there should be some sort of backup for the nurses if they're shipped off like this. I don't know the real life practices, but just watching this episode, I was like, that feels dangerous to me.
Well, if you think about it, like, you know, they're really just handing them tools, and I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. Like we saw in the scene, it was basically just like Father Mulcahy, Klinger, Radar, just a bunch of other background characters not really knowing what tools were. And in that sense, I feel like you're right. Probably people in the MASH unit should, even if they're not like the hospital staff, should probably know that like what tools are what, just like for safety purposes and for parts like this. But it's funny to me though that you keep saying like this women and children first type of thing, and that's not how I took it, and I don't think that's how it was supposed to be either, of just like, it was literally like, yeah, we have to ship the nurses off like in case we get raided and they like get raped. Like that's like,
oh my god, I didn't think about that. That is,
like, and
oh my god.
I was wondering if, because there's an episode coming up too that like Margaret talks about that like a little bit more in depth. Like remember in an episode prior, she said something about like rape and like with the enemies and stuff like that. I think it was Rainbow Bridge. And I thought that it was going to be this episode that we're doing now. But yeah, no, it was funny to me that you said that, because I was just like, I don't think that he knows what they were doing here.
Yeah, I didn't. I just don't tend to go there. I understand why like you would.
Yeah.
But I don't assume the worst of it generally. So I just kind of assumed it was like ship captain rules of like, if your camp's being attacked, you gotta get the women out of there because we gotta protect the women, not for assault, just like general courtesy, I suppose. But you are probably right that they wanted to make sure that the nurses are safe in every regard.
I don't think you're necessarily wrong either of just like, oh yeah, like best practices, like, you know, the women and children first kind of thing. I was trying to actually look this up before we recorded this episode, and I really couldn't find like the practices like that. I don't know today what the military like rules on that necessarily are, because obviously women take on a lot different roles than the women in the MASH unit would have. But just like, I think from prior knowledge of like the episodes coming up where it kind of like deals with that, that's like why my brain kind of jumped to that of just like, that's what they're doing. But yeah, I would really like to know if any of our listeners have any of that information, like what those practices are or would have been. I always like to know like the military aspect of it too, because, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I'm very interested to watch the later episodes where it's like a full-on topic of discussion by Margaret, apparently. And I was reminded that like everybody there is a volunteer, because later, or at some point in the episode, Klinger makes a joke of like, if he was a woman, he wouldn't be on a military base, he'd be at home pregnant.
Yeah, that was really funny. But speaking of this lovely topic, let's move on to something more fun, where this phone call between Frank and Margaret was also such a hard hitter for me in the comedy section. This is insane.
Yeah, now that we're like fully talking about it, this episode is kind of packed to the gills with just like bits on bits on bits. Because this phone call was kind of insane. The split screen, like we were saying earlier with all the other stuff that's kind of experimental for this episode, I was like, whoa, split screen. I didn't know they had the technology to do this back then. But it was really fun to watch Margaret and Frank have this like very high school kind of conversation. They even call it out as high school, which I thought was very like cute in a weird way. What do you think of this?
So, I mean, as anyone would guess, you know, you don't love hearing Frank say, yeah, if you're with anybody else, I'm going to go crazy and kill you and myself. That was a bit off-putting.
I forgot about that. It's been a few hours since I watched it. Forgot about that.
Having Frank say, like, this is not me shitting on the show or anything like that, but having Frank say, I'm going to kill you and myself, and Margaret saying, wow, that's great, is like such male writer energy. Very male writer energy.
I don't disagree.
It was funny. It was definitely like a funny conversation. And to go back to your original point, I loved this because it was such a relic of the past. Like, I don't know if high schoolers do the whole like, no, you hang up first thing, because with like FaceTime or whatever.
Who calls people anymore?
Right. So it was just like, it was this really cute, like dated, but still just adorable thing of like having a landline and being like, no, you hang up first. No, we'll hang up on like the same thing. It was just cute. And
they're both like in their late 30s, early 40s. It was cute. And the thing that I will say about the I'll kill you and then myself line is that Margaret responds to that by saying, oh, Frank, knowing that you want to kill me really makes me feel alive. Like, utterly insane. Again, so many red flags with this man, and this woman is just wearing, I guess, rose-tinted glasses, so they all look like flags.
She's just wearing, like, yeah, no. I was trying to make like some kind of metaphor of her wearing glasses so that the red flags look like green flags, but it's not coming out right.
She's
and like
colorblind.
Well, but yeah, I think that the real like topper for this scene for me was when Hawkeye and Trapper, like Margaret and Frank are counting to 3, and then they're gonna hang up together, and then Hawkeye and Trapper both say 3 at the end because they're listening in on the other line, which again is such a relic of the past because like there aren't landlines anymore. Like they exist, but who uses a landline? And
big
so it was
sibling energy.
It was just very funny. And I knew it was going to happen and it still got me. It was hysterical.
Margaret screaming, "Get him, Frank," was quite cute. It's really good topper for the scene. I agree.
And then Frank falling into his own foxholes while he's chasing them. It was
Oh
just
my
like,
God.
it was like big sibling energy. It was very funny.
Mm-hmm. Everything with the foxholes in this episode is really funny. And I like how it actually does tie into the plot. Like, it ends... The episode has this resolution because Frank falls into his own foxhole, and then they literally drive a Jeep over him so he can't get out.
I loved that too. And speaking of that, that's how we get to my favorite scene at the end with Henry, Hawkeye, Radar, and Trapper all in Henry's office watching Frank's wedding video.
And they bring this video up earlier in the episode. They're like, oh, there's a secret video or secret film under Frank's bed that we're not allowed to touch. And obviously, so they trap him, so now they can touch the film. And they're like, oh, what's it going to be? And it's obviously not going to be like a dirty movie because it's Frank. And then they play it, and it's his wedding film. And I love this so much. I like seeing Frank's wife. I don't know if the bit with her was that she was like unattractive, but I was like, that is pretty much what I pictured Frank's wife being, like just a woman who's just kind of done with him immediately.
The way that the poor woman looked so miserable, and Frank had this like goofy smile on his face, and how everyone from her side of the family looked exactly the same with that like very just like done expression was very funny.
Really? This man? Okay, sure.
And I think the thing that I love about this so much is the comments from the peanut gallery watching this. I would love to know if this was all ad-libbed because it was so funny.
This had, I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but there's a show called Mystery Science Theater 3000 where the entire bit of the show is that they watch old movies, they play the entire movie, and they have running commentary track about how bad it is and making like quips and jokes. And this whole scene was so Mystery Science Theater 3000 to me. I was like, this is so ahead of its time. Yelling at the screen becomes like an art form later on. Like, Hawkeye's a pioneer of entertainment right now.
It was so good. It was just so good. When they were cutting the cake and Hawkeye said, watch the cake die of malpractice, was just like my favorite line.
He was always bad with knives.
Klinger commenting on like the dresses and the outfits and stuff was fantastic. And then when Hawkeye and Trapper were narrating Frank's like discussion with his wife when she wouldn't let him drive, oh my God, I was just like a ball of laughter. I was like peeing myself. It was just so funny.
No, it was really good. And I love, it's similar to the Henry home video that was played, I think, in season 2, that anytime you see them in their real lives in America, I just get so, I don't know if the right word is nostalgic, because I'm not nostalgic for this, but I'm just like, oh, I like seeing them be like normal people with their normal lives with like people that we don't know around them. I love seeing it. Like, it was really sweet, and obviously all the commentary like makes it funny and dry, but just seeing Frank like so happy and his wife obviously not happy to have him was so real to me. I was like, yep, that is how Frank's marriage would be. Like, they don't hate each other, but not a lot of love there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of like, I don't want to say I understand why he like is cheating on his wife, but it doesn't seem like a very love-filled marriage between the two of them, unfortunately.
And I love Frank. Not to talk about Frank's hair again, but I love Frank like kind of done up for his wedding. How he's got like a gel and he's like trying to look like a nice dapper gentleman, and he looks like a little bit of a weirdo in like his tux. You know, it doesn't quite fit him right. It was so fun to see.
This was just a great scene. I love watching this scene. I watch it over and over and over again. Every time it comes on, I'm like, oh, this is the episode. Yes. And I get so excited.
I can see why. I can definitely imagine going onto YouTube and just like watching this all the time when I get bored. This is so fun. This is a real highlight. And now that we're talking about it, I do understand why this is like a real Vanessa certified classic. Because now I'm like, yeah, no, this has got the good stuff in it.
This has got everything you want, I feel, from a MASH episode.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we should wrap up, though, with the final bit of this episode where things come to a head. There's a siren while they're watching this video, and it's very dramatic for about 5 seconds. And, you know, you hear a plane overhead, and you're like, oh no, what's gonna happen? And then Radar looks out the window, and it just turns out that it's 5 o'clock Charlie. He was the big air raid that they had to evacuate the nurses for. It was just like this piece of information that turned out to just like be wrong.
And the thing is, right, first of all, this blew my mind. Having 5 o'clock Charlie come back in a separate episode in a different season, I was like, whoa, this is some deep lore connections that they're doing right now. But literally, like 30 seconds before they said it was 5 o'clock Charlie, I was like, I wonder why they're making such a big deal out of an air raid. They literally got air raided every day at 5 o'clock for a while. And then lo and behold, it was my man, Charles, on the dot.
5 p.m. Charles.
It was great to see. I love how they concluded. I love any sort of reference to older episodes like this. It was so unexpected. Mm-hmm. It was really fun to watch.
Yeah, we got a bunch of like lore in this episode, or like continuity, backstory, whatever you want to call it. It was great. Like I really loved the tie-in with 5 o'clock Charlie. That really just made it for me. And the fact that it wasn't even an air raid. He was literally dropping like propaganda. And it was just really funny. Like, Harry Truman has slept with your wife.
Yeah, it was like Hawkeye made a joke of it being like an IOU for an air raid attack, which is kind of what it was.
Literally what it was.
The one time he kind of hit.
Yeah, honestly, like, he got it, but that's because, you know, papers are easier, I guess, than missiles, but, you know,
The paper boy can deliver a paper. Can he deliver a missile? Find out.
But, of course, then we get back to, like, the scene after this is the nurses coming back and this, like, big reunited thing, and Margaret also not letting Frank drive the Jeep back to the camp, and that was a very fun throwback to the wedding scene. That was good.
That was a great way to tie it all together. I love Frank's just weird relationship with women, honestly. The fact that he cannot get in the driver's seat, and he's like, but I'm the big man. So funny, and like explains so much about him.
Yeah,
you know, he wants to be in the driver's seat, but like he's not ever gonna be in that driver's seat, is he?
But hey, there's also nothing wrong with a woman who can drive, so we're all good here.
Yeah, no, it's a really fun conclusion. I had a lot of fun with this episode, and as per usual, talking about it with you really made me appreciate this episode as a whole much more.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed this episode more than you originally thought you were going to. So do you have favorite lines from this episode?
I do. I've said a lot of these during recording, but one that I didn't say was when Frank was building the foxholes with like the enlisted men. He says like, now that's a hole a man can throw himself into with pride. That is some peak Frank right there.
That is a Frank Burns ass quote.
That is a real Bernie Burn right there.
So I have a couple. I won't say all of them, but I thought that this was just like a really weird line where Radar told Hawkeye and Trapper, you know, hey, we're expecting an air raid. We're going to evacuate the nurses. And Trapper says, got any other news? And Hawkeye goes, Christmas canceled. The Pentagon's been enlarged. Lassie's been spayed. This is a strange line to me to add in there.
So many weird quips Hawkeye has. Let's be real.
And then my other one was when Frank and Margaret are on the phone, and Frank said something about like, oh, the only way I'm getting through is by reading letters from my wife. And Margaret goes, really, Frank? Just letters? No packages? She hasn't knitted you a divorce? Loved that one.
Maybe she knitted a divorce out of his hair. Let's
Yeah, maybe his mother taught her the art of like gluing Frank's hair into flowers.
And then she put that on a divorce form. But do you have any trivia for us?
I do. You're going to love this one. So I have trivia on Loudon Wainwright III as Calvin Spaulding, a.k.a. Guitar Guy.
Yeah, I knew. I was going to call him Cliff. I was going to try to call him by name in this episode because they do name him. But I was like, I have no idea what this man's name is. I'm just calling him Guitar Guy for the duration of this recording.
Before we actually get into the trivia on him, wasn't it funny that scene when they're all in the officers club and he's just like upside down and Frank's like, what are you doing? And Hawkeye and Trevor like, he's gonna stay upside down until the nurses come back.
Like some weird hunger strike, even though it's nobody's fault.
Okay, so Wainwright was known for his song Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road, which, okay. When he made his appearances on MASH, he recorded over 20 studio albums, his main genres being folk and blues, and he is known for his comedic lyrics, which kind of tracks for, like, what his character is doing in these episodes. Like, I think that this is kind of, like, showcasing his personality, like, his, like, real songwriting. It's interesting, though, that you brought up that he sounded like Bob Dylan because one of his inspirations for singing and being a songwriter is Bob Dylan. And Wainwright had 2 of his albums receive Grammy nominations, and one album won for Best Traditional Folk Album at the 2010 Grammy. So he is a Grammy award.
2010 Grammys?
Yeah. Okay,
Whoa.
Wait, hang on, I know. So Wainwright also had several guest appearances in films like The Aviator, Big Fish, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and he was a contributor on the soundtrack for the film Knocked Up and also had a small part in that film. As for TV, Wainwright appeared in Undeclared, Ally McBeal, and Parks and Recreation, as well as performing in the first season of SNL as the musical guest.
This man, okay, I apologize for making fun of this man's musical prowess.
Me too!
Like, I was not aware that this man is, like, a legend. I'm gonna call him a legend. If he's in so many different things and has Grammys, I might have to look this man up on Spotify. I might have to listen to his actual music.
Right? So, yeah, when I was researching this, I felt so bad for saying that I hated his voice in this episode, that the first episode that he was in, because I'm like, well, clearly he's like accomplished, and I just, so this should be a lesson to everybody. Don't shit on stuff that is just not your cup of tea, because you don't know who you're shitting on. Anyway.
Exactly. Oh, I love that he was in Undeclared. I love that show, and that's so
yeah,
obscure.
Right? So also, Wainwright is still alive today, and he still performs. So
That's
he has like
awesome.
upcoming shows like in like Washington and Phoenix and stuff like that. So if anyone really loves the sound of Guitar Guy's voice, you could probably go see him somewhere sometime soon.
Vanessa, we have to, and I mean we have to. If he's ever in our area, we have to go to one of his concerts and wear our MASH t-shirts there. That is like a requirement for us now. That'll be a Patreon bonus episode. We're viewing this concert.
Can you imagine? Now I like really want to do it, but I also want to like plug Guitar Guy. So I think we're going to include a link to his website where if you're interested, and you can buy tickets to his shows.
Oh my God. Thank you for this information today, Vanessa.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so after all of this, what is your martini rating for this episode?
I think, honestly, I'm just feeling real generous these past 2 weeks. This has been a real good run of MASH. Apparently, we have a great one coming up. I'm unfamiliar. I'm going 5 out of 5. No complaints. Even the weird stuff about Frank's hair, that's all part of the texture, baby. That's all what makes this episode great.
I was originally like objectively going to give this a 4 or a 4.5 out of 5, but like honestly, how could I complain about this episode? It's such a great episode. I mean, I know I did complain about the episode, and that's like par for the course for me, right? But I loved this episode so much. Like, it's definitely one that I think that I would recommend to people to watch for MASH.
Definitely.
So, yeah, gotta go same. 5 out of 5.
For me, like a 5 out of 5 is not like a flawless masterpiece. It's just something where I'm like, they did what they wanted to do. pretty well. And I think this episode is a great example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm going to start being like more subjective in my ratings for these episodes. So we're going to get some higher rated episodes for me. Yeah.
Join me in the liking stuff cult. It's fun here.
So, just to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob Virabelko for being our technical consultant, Melissa, my sister, for cover art, and of course, our listeners. Thank you so much. Our music, social media, and contacts for the show are linked in the description, as always. And join us next week for Season 3, Episode 11, Adam's Rib. Until then, spread propaganda about presidents sleeping with your wife. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.